All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, the very first Labor Day parade was held on Tuesday, September 5th, 1882 in New York City. Here's how the New York Times covered that momentous event. The parade of the working men yesterday, although not so large as its organizers predicted, was conducted in an orderly and pleasant manner. Those who rode or marched in the procession were cheerful and evidently highly gratified with the display. The originators of the labor demonstration, as the parade was spoken of, frankly admitted that the working men were determined to show their numerical strength in order to satisfy the politicians of this city that they must not be trifled with. Now, according to the Times report, the men carried signs with slogans like, "Labor built this republic and labor shall rule it," "No money monopoly," "Close the stores at 6 p.m., 8 hours for a legal day's work," "To the workers should belong the wealth," "Vote the labor ticket, party hacks to the rear," and "Pay no rent." The reporter at the Times characterized that last motto as startling. So that first Labor Day action wasn't about having a day off or even just about honoring working people. It was about power. It was a concerted demonstration of strength in numbers and a number of highly specific demands along with statements of values. Over a decade later, President Cleveland made Labor Day a national holiday. Today, I have to be honest, I find those slogans and the clear-eyed demonstration of working power to be both inspiring and depressing. Union membership currently stands at just 10% of the workforce. Inequality, already bad, has skyrocketed during the current pandemic. As billionaires add zeros to their bank accounts, working people are either facing starvation or work to the bone with little protection, no added pay, and little thanks as the pandemic rages. And it's hard to see, frankly, where the help might come from. I've long thought that the Democratic Party ought to have an absolute red line, no forgiveness litmus test on labor rights above all else. Why? Well, for one thing, unions are absolutely essential to working class prosperity. Just take a look at this chart because it really tells you everything you need to know. The blue line there is middle class share of income, and the green line is the union membership rate. You can see that as unions decline, so does middle class income. It really is that simple. And of course, it makes sense. Any individual worker is effectively powerless up against a large corporation. There is only strength in numbers. That's what those original March organizers understood, and it's the most basic tenet of labor organizing today. Now, the easiest way to spot a so-called populist charlatan is by their stance on unions. It's easy to adopt a one-off decent policy idea like increasing the minimum wage or paid sick leave, but to fully support and empower unions is to believe that working people should actually have real power. On this metric, of course, Donald Trump has been nothing but a despicable fraud. As a businessman, he was a union buster, and as a president, his appointees have launched an all-out ideological attack on worker rights. Unfortunately, it's gone mostly unnoticed by a media that's too distracted by shiny objects and outright conspiracy theories. Did you know, for example, that Trump has appointed a bunch of union-busting corporate lawyers to the National Labor Relations Board, an absolutely crucial body in charge of enforcing and adjudicating labor law? According to The Nation, this NLRB has granted the Chamber of Commerce 10 out of 10 of their anti-worker wishes to undermine collective bargaining and organizing. Did you know also that this NLRB has actually used coronavirus as an excuse to cancel all union elections in which workers can seek to form a union? So if you and your fellow workers have had it with your corporate bosses risking your health and safety to fatten the bottom line and want to form a union, you have absolutely no opportunity to right now, in spite of the fact that clearly these elections could easily happen by mail. On labor rights, Trump has been atrocious and will be atrocious no matter how many workers he uses to launder his 2020 Chamber of Commerce rhetoric. But what about Biden? Well, it's been a real mixed bag there. Obviously, while the RNC used working people to advocate for a corporate agenda, the DNC barely even bothered to celebrate workers or talk explicitly about unions at all. The truth is that the post-Clinton modern Democratic Party is deeply uncomfortable with unions. Core labor values of solidarity and believing in the basic worth and dignity of all workers are anathema to a party obsessed with Obama and Mayor Pete-type special flowers. The veneration of the meritocracy does not exist easily alongside a belief that ordinary workers are capable of holding and exercising power. Labor leaders aren't talking about it much publicly now, but this tension played out explicitly in the Obama administration. Obama campaigned on a key labor priority called the Employee Free Choice Act, or card check, which would have made it much easier for workers to be able to unionize. But at the beginning of the administration, Obama decided to prioritize his Mitt Romney-style health care without a public option and with a so-called Cadillac tax, which was basically a giant screw you to unions. They would ultimately put little to no political capital behind passing the Employee Free Choice Act, which then predictably failed. So look, Biden's got some pretty good stuff on his website about backing unions, and he's old enough to have some connectivity to that older style of Democratic politics. His own humble non-pedigree also makes him less of a special flowers snob than Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, John Kerry, or Barack Obama. But there's zero sign that he'll actually fight for the union priorities he lists on his website, and his long record is littered with bad votes for trade deals and PNTR and carrying water for those who would bury working people under a mountain of debt. The irony is that the political opening for someone to be fiercely and unabashedly pro-union has frankly never been greater. The media and a lot of politicians like to portray unions as a product of a bygone era, when the truth is the only reason they're fading is because corrupt politicians have partnered with business to help destroy them, while Democrats idly stand by pretending to be powerless. More people want to join unions now than at any point in the last 40 years, which makes perfect sense since workers are being subjected to new horizons in brutal and dehumanizing treatment. Gallup just found that union favorability stands at 65%. That is the highest rating in decades, and that number jumps to 71% among those aged 18 to 34. Makes sense, given the current dystopian hellscape and all. The bottom line is, the politicians may wish it were otherwise, but the numbers are there. The need is there. The power is there, just waiting to be taken. Time to make like it's 1882 and show that workers must not be trifled with. And Sagar, that Gallup polling was so fascinating.
It's amazing.
Because I think something that people would really be surprised by is, yes, among Democrats, the numbers are even higher. It's like 80-some% of Democrats. But even 45% of Republicans have a favorable view of unions. You would never know that from listening to the Republican politicians.
No, you wouldn't. And you know why? It's because most of the Republican politicians are bought and paid for by the Chamber of Commerce, who are the enemy of unions.
Yeah.
And I actually, one of the things I've been trying to push on the right is something from Michael Lynn's book, where he talks about the necessity of unions is actually an inherently conservative argument.
Yes.
Because it's a non-governmental institution.
Exactly right.
It is a union, literally, of citizens outside the strictures of the government, which band together to lobby for their collective rights, in the same way that you could think about a church or any other non-governmental institution which fosters community in your home and which fights for the collective good of those who are within it. And so by going to war against unions basically over the last 30 years, you've inherently destroyed one of the pillars that upheld working class communities and fought for many benefits, pensions, and other things. And now what they're saying is that, like, okay, well, now the government might have to step in and actually deliver something that you didn't necessarily want. Like, you could have had all of this through a private bargaining system and collective bargaining with unions and with companies, instead of having the government now have to step in. So fostering more unions and actually having more union-friendly policy, and I'm not saying there weren't some problems with unions, even union people admit that back in the 70s,
sure,
all that stuff. But that going to all-out war against it was a dramatic mistake. Of course, 45% of Republicans support it, just like they have heterodox views on health care, on taxes, wealth taxes. And so the politicians are just sitting here letting this fertile political ground just rot, right? I mean, it's just much more about why are they not really talking about unions? Because they're catering to these white suburbanites. Those people aren't in a union. They don't need a union to advocate. They have the government that advocates for their business. And so you have all of these working class voters who are now getting screwed by the pandemic, and they want somebody to advocate for their rights. And that's something that, look, either political party, whoever wants to go in and try and foster more unionship in this country, they're going to win a presidential election.
Well, and the problem is that you have two political parties that really fundamentally believe in governance by elites.
That's right.
They believe in the special flowers theory. They believe in the technocracy. They believe in all of that. And it's a fundamentally anti-populist posture that both of these parties have bought into. And so the union movement and the labor movement rubs up very uncomfortably against that, because it's this idea, no, number one, that everyone is worthy of like a basic decent living, that you don't have to like have won the genetic lottery or the zip code lottery or whatever it is to deserve to have a decent living in a wealthy country. But also this idea fundamentally that workers can and should have power. I mean, that what could be a more populist notion than, no, actually, we think you should have power in your workplace. You shouldn't just be told what to do. That's a very uncomfortable notion for both of these two political parties in the modern era. And the Democratic Party, I mean, Thomas Frank has done great work on tracking this shift in particular, but as they've oriented around this rising affluent white-collar suburbanites, that's when they still pay lip service to the unions. Biden was out with a joint op-ed with Richard Trumka talking about his plan for unions. And I want to be clear, like, if he followed through on the things he's proposing, it would be good and it would help to, but there's just no sign in decades of the modern Democratic Party that they are actually going to prioritize and fight for those things. And if you care about working people having power and prosperity and middle class growing in this country, there's literally nothing that you could do just looking at the data that would more effectively provide that boost to their incomes and their livelihoods.
Yeah, I certainly agree.
All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.